person?
Well, I suppose. It's complicated. I don't know.
Is he a stranger that Rabbi?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that.
Rabbi, it looks like you have a direct line to Rashi.
I was just checking something up.
Now?
I was just confirming that what I'm going to say tonight is all good. He agreed, and he's very happy with the way we're going forward. It's all good. No, I can't say I have that. I don't have any sort of connection like that. I wish I did. You know, there were people that had connections with Eliyahu Hanavi and were able to get directives from them. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch himself wrote a book of his discussions and conversations he had with a malach. Can you imagine it? We're talking about a whole different level of. It's not like he made it up and he had a drink. We've got documented what he was told by the malach. So there's real stuff going on. Just tells you the level of the Shulchan Aruch, but that's incredible. Okay, I think they say Rashi also had Gilui Eliyahu, which means there were certain tzaddikim who were so great they were able to have the opportunity to actually see Eliyahu Navi, and I don't know what sort of conversations they had. Was it like, "Hi, how are you?" I'm not sure, but there was that connection with Eliyahu Navi, but you had to be at a very, very high level, and until modern day, the Baba Sali, they say he had Gilui Eliyahu. I think the Ben Ish Chai, they say about that. So there is stories like that, but that's already a whole different conversation. Okay, so welcome everybody to another great Rashi class. We are just letting people in. Sorry. We are Parshat Chayei Sarah and the Torah. Hi everyone. The Torah is swiftly moving on with not waiting for anyone. We're ready. The lifetime of Yitzchak Avinu and the opening Pesukim of this week's parasha begins with the death, the passing of none other than Sarah Imenu. Sarah, our matriarch, the wife of Abraham Avinu, and this is really the point of departure for this week's parasha. But as we always do, we know that Sefer Bereshit is very often a one after another. We're going from one stage to another, from one story to another, and we're going to continue from the very end of last week's parasha, chapter Chaf Bet, chapter 22, Pasuk Chaf, Pasuk 20. The end of Parashat Vayera. If you've got a Chumash with a Pirush Rashi in front of you, you can get the maximum amount of meat out of this class because we're doing a Rashi-based class inside. So, just a quick recap, first of all, of the parasha. The parasha in general is a packed full parasha. As you know, the parasha starts off with the passing of Sarah, with the negotiations of Abraham Avinu at this critical juncture in his life of burying his dear wife, and he has to start having all sorts of negotiations with someone as difficult as Ephron, who likes to talk a lot and do nothing. Sounds familiar? Abraham Avinu talks a little and does a lot. Mishnah in Avot says that's the difference between Avraham Avinu and others. And then what happens eventually? They eventually come to a certain negotiation, and they settle on the famous place of Hebron. Last year we had a lunch and we discussed, Parashat Chayei Sarah is always the time where thousands of people throng to Kiryat Arba, to Hebron, to the area where the Avot and the Imahot, where Adam and Chava are buried, Abraham and Yitzchak, Abraham and Sarah are buried, and our patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. Besides four, who's not there? No? Which one of the...
רחל.
Rachel. Why not?
והראש של עשיו גם שם. האמת עליי, רחל זלזלה במשכב של הצדיק.
So she is really in a different place. She is actually in a place of Bethlehem. She's in that area because she died suddenly on the way, and ultimately there was all this all decided from God that she should be in that place specifically because later on the Jewish people went past there. Yosef went past there, and they prayed there, and she prayed for them by Yosef, and later on, when they were taken to Galut after the destruction of Bet Midrash, and that was another time where
בזמן לידת בנימין.
Sorry?
בזמן שהיא ילדה את בנימין.
She had a baby, Benjamin, and she dies at that time. She actually calls Benjamin Ben Oni, and Yaakov actually changes the name Benjamin. But we'll get there, please God, when we get to those parashiyot. But that is Parashat Shlach. Yes, Dan.
What surprises me is that with this parsha, it starts off with the life of Sarah, but then it said that she dies. And then we read very little after that.
Well, we haven't started yet. I just want to recap. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. We'll deal with that soon. So, I mean, who's going to deal with that if not Rashi? Come on.
It doesn't make sense right now. This whole list of parsha Chayei Sarah, and yet the first line after it is that she died. And it doesn't say anything else.
We'll do that soon. I just want a quick recap of what the parsha is talking about. So you have Sarah's death. We have the negotiations of Ephron with Abraham. We eventually move on. Abraham's getting on in life. He says, I have to find a daughter, a suitable match for my son Abraham and son Yitzchak. And he eventually sends his Zekan Beto, his right-hand man, if you want, Eliezer, to go and find a suitable match for his daughter. He goes and travels, the whole story with the camels and with the whole situation by the well there. And we know the whole story. The Pasuk goes and describes in elaborate detail the whole situation over there, how he goes in, he eventually finds Rivka and Betuel and the whole story over there with the stories being told over to Betuel and Lavan, her brother and her father. And then eventually they concede. We learn out many halachot from the story over there, by the way, with regards to marriage, lots of different halachot which we learn over there. And then the end of the parasha, Abraham dies. Well, Rivka comes back, they get married, Yitzchak and Rivka get married. Sarah's death is now, Yitzchak is now comforted after the death of his mother, kind of full circle, because Rivka now has taken the place of the mother and is as much as a tzadeket, is as righteous as her mother-in-law. And eventually Yitzchak and Ishmael bury Abraham. Abraham dies. And the end of the parasha finishes off with Ishmael actually passes away. Okay, that's pretty much the parasha in a capsule. Okay, so we are going back to Perek Chavbet Pasuk Chaf, chapter 22, Pasuk 20, the end of last week's parasha. And what we're doing is we're trying to understand the relation between this week's parasha and the end of last week's parasha. Pasuk goes as follows. We just had, prior to this, the Akedah, probably the most momentous occasion which happened in Sefer Bereshit, one of the point of merit and point of departure for all of us as people. It's what we mention every day, what we mention, Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the merit of Abraham, the merit of Isaac. We mention this situation of the Akedah specifically, very much the forefront of our prayers. We start off every day Shachrit. For those that are there on time, 7 a.m. Shlomo's nodding. The pasuk of the Akedah, all these pasukim we read out, at the beginning of chapter 22. And then we actually highlight this area, this major event which took place on obviously Rosh Hashanah, which is both the Kriyah, as we know, Yossi's over here, and reads for us every year, Rosh Hashanah. And as we know, that is the shofar which we have, which reminds us of the Akedah of Yitzchak. So the Akedah is really a central part of our lives and a merit which we consistently go back to and really deserves many classes in its own right just to understand. I was saying to myself last week, I should have just focused on the Akedah, but you know what? We don't get more than 2 through 3 psukim anyway. So who cares if it's 2 or 3 psukim at the beginning of the parasha or 2 or 3 psukim at the end of the parasha? Torah it is, and Torah we're learning. So either way, Avraham Avinu had just passed his major test. According to many Rishonim, it was his last and final test. But he comes home, and there seems to be a continuation to this week's parasha. We'll see soon in Rashi. But there seems to be something in the middle, like kind of inserted here, which is not really its place. And I actually mentioned it the first day of Rosh Hashanah in my sermon, but just I want to bring out a different point over here. Pasuk, simple pasuk. Perek Chavbet Pasuk Chav, Pasuk 20. Vayhi acharei hadevarim ha'ele, and it happened after these times, after these matters. Vayugad le'Avraham lemor, and Abraham was told, saying, Hine yalda milka gam hi banim lenachor achicha. You should know, behold, your Milka, she too has borne children to Nachor, your brother. So let's just get a bit of Jewish genealogy out. Let me just share with you a family tree. So we've got Terach at the top. We spoke about him 2 weeks ago. Terach had 3 sons. Avraham, can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Screen on the, yeah. Avraham, Haran, and Nachor. Haran had a son called Lot. He had a daughter called Sarah Stroke. We spoke about this the first week. Sarah, otherwise known as. Anybody remember?
Yeah.
Yiska.
Thank you, Yiska. Because she had more Ruach HaKodesh than Avraham Avinu. Remember that was the reason we said, Rashi said, why Abraham married her when he should have really married Milcah. Either way, Milcah gets married to Nachor. Nachor is Abraham's brother. Okay? So far so good? So these two are married. So what is Milcah to Abraham? Abraham is his niece. Milcah has a son called Betuel. And Betuel had a daughter called Rivka, Rebecca. Okay? Let's go through the psukim. So again, if I ask you, what is Rivka's relation to Yitzchak? The answer is Yitzchak and Rivka were second cousins, no?
Cousins.
Second cousins. Yitzchak is a cousin to Betuel.
Second cousins.
Second cousins, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And Rivka is a second cousin to Yitzchak. Yitzchak, this is interesting because that means Yitzchak's father-in-law was actually his cousin. Right?
It
Okay.
was actually his uncle.
Yitzchak's father-in-law was his cousin.
His father-in-law is his
Yitzchak and Betuel
Is
are
it his
you
uncle?
repeat it simply, excuse?
Nahor. Oh,
Betuel, the son of Milcah, is
Betuel. Okay, נכון.
the Betuel is the cousin of Yitzchak,
כן, כן.
and Yitzchak is the nephew. And Rivka is the daughter of Betuel, the second cousin of Yitzchak. Okay, you got it on the screen. I'll leave that up for another half a minute just so we can get everything worked out. Okay, so we're moving swiftly on. Okay, so we've got it all right. You should know your brother actually gave birth to Milcah, and Milcah had, and he carries on, the pasuk goes on, and they name the children, Ve'et Betuel, end of pasuk 22. Pasuk 23, Ubetuel yalad et Rivka, and Betuel has Rebecca, has Rivka. Okay, very nice. And carries on a few more names. Very nice. We go straight into the next parasha to understand the continuation of the story. Now, the question is, this seemingly seems really out of place, this piece. Rashi jumps up and says, what on earth is going on over here? Why is this information so important that I need to know this? Not only that, there's someone missing over here who is predominant throughout our parasha. We know Betuel, we know Rivka, but there's someone else who's missing who is not mentioned over here. Who's that?
Lavan.
Thank you. Lavan. He's also the son of Betuel, not mentioned in the list over here. If we're talking about mishpachology, as they like to call it, family breakdown, what's this got to do with this part of the parasha, number one? And number two, why are you placing it over here? So Rashi obviously jumps up and deals with both those problems. Says Rashi, Acharei adverim ha'ele vayugad v'chule. Pasuk 20. Says Rashi, after these matters, Abraham was told, Beshuva mehar haMoriah. Says Rashi, upon Abraham's return from Mount Moriah, that was after the Akedah, Haya Abraham meharher, Abraham was pondering, ve'omer, and he says, Ilu haya bani shechut kvar. If my son would have actually been slaughtered already, and the ending of the story wouldn't quite have happened as it happened in the end, and it would have been all over, Yitzchak was slaughtered, offered up, and all, that was the end of the story, then guess what? Abraham is left with no future. Hayiti holech b'lo banim, I would be going without children. Hayali lahasio isha mi benot aner eshkol mamre. I should have actually married him off to a woman locally. From who? Who were the local good men around? We said last week, Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre, the three good men who were always advising Abraham and made a pact between them to be able to support each other. We said Elonei Mamre was the place where God came to visit Abraham, last week's parasha, Elav Hashem, right, if you remember. Bisero HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you know what, relax, nothing happened, Yitzchak's still around, and you know what? That Rebecca's spouse, Yitzchak's spouse, to be, had been born. That's what I meant by these matters. The pondering of matters, which came about because of the binding of Isaac. So Rashi is just trying to say, what's what place has this got over here? The answer is, this is where Abraham's mind started wandering. He's saying to himself, what's going on? Well, if this would have not ended the way I wanted to, guess what would have happened? I would have had no future. And I should have, in retrospect, at least got my son married off. Then I would have slaughtered him. At least I would have grandchildren who would continue my legacy. But thank God, nothing happened. God jumps in and says, Abraham, take a break. You know who was just born? Rivka's actual soulmate. Okay, so that's really explained where this comes in. The other question which we have to deal with, why does Lavan not come into the story over here? If we're speaking out the breakdown of the family, yes, Shlomo?
What does it mean by Yugad LeAbraham? Where was it?
So Rashi, the way Rashi says it, it sounds like it was a bit of a Ruach HaKodesh. It was like a heavenly, some sort of type of nevuah.
So your wife is giving birth to your only son, well, the second son, but from your own wife, and you're not around?
Again?
Your wife is giving birth, your original wife, your only wife, actually, because Hagar is Shifcha.
No, there's no Hagar. Hagar didn't have the child. Milcah had the child.
No, hold on. Ishmael was born to Hagar.
Correct.
So technically, Yitzchak is the second son.
Correct.
But he's his son from his wife.
From his wife.
Not from the Amma. Right?
In fact, so in the end of the sixth parasha, Abraham gets remarried to someone, an unknown woman, someone called Keturah.
Yeah.
Keturah.
Points out, if you look at the end of the parasha,
But my question is, why is it Abraham
Keturah
need
is
to be
actually
told?
Hagar. Right. Again?
Why Abraham need to be told that Sarah had a boy?
No, Sarah didn't have a boy. Again, Sarah's not having a boy. Sarah actually just died. You'll see in a minute when we just open up the parasha. We'll discuss that in a minute.
Sorry, my bad. I'm reading it. Sorry.
Okay, we're clear.
Yeah.
Okay, because of the brothers and sisters and cousins, lots happening.
Well,
I feel like
Rabbi,
in Gibraltar, if you're not married to your wife, who's your cousin and your auntie and your grandmother and your thing, then you're done. If you're not married relation wife 5 times at least, then you're out of the tribe. That's how it works in Gibraltar. There's only 800 Jews. That's what happens. Okay.
That's where the yield comes.
That's right. Sorry, Dan.
so why wasn't Laban married outside of the fact that he's got nothing to do with Yitzhak marrying Rebecca? That's his sister. That's about it. There's no real need to have him.
What's bothering Rashi? Says Rashi. That's bothering Rashi. Pasuk 23. Ubetuel yalad et Rivka. And Betuel begot Rebecca. Kol yichusim halalu. All of these genealogies lo nichtavu ela bishvil pasuk zeh. Written only on account of this verse. We need one thing from this whole story. That you know what? Betuel gave birth to Rivka.
Rebecca. That's it.
That's it.
That's
So,
it.
Laban, we love you, man. We come on the parasha this week, but you have no connection why this genealogy is slam dunked right in between a story where Abraham's leaving the Akedah, coming home, and we open up this week's parasha and curtains open. Abraham Avinu comes home. He's so excited to tell to his wife, his dear beloved wife, about what happened, the whole story. He had to go, he got Nevuah, and he was going to bind Yitzchak, and he put him up. 3 days, journey, back and forth, they came up. Abraham promised him all the best stuff in the world, and he opens the door. Who's there? Sarah's dead on the floor. Anticlimax.
Question.
Yes, Dan.
There's a problem with that. He wasn't living at home. After Mount Moriah, he actually went to Beersheba. Meanwhile, Sarah is living in Hebron. He had to learn about her death to go to Hebron, and that's what it says he mourned
You're
her
100% right. You're 100%
passing.
right.
So they weren't really living together.
There's a discussion and Rashi picks up on that, and maybe we'll come to that soon, exactly
Okay.
what happened. Where were they living? Where was he coming to? Where was he coming from? At the moment, as far as we know he's coming from Beersheba, because that's what we said he was, right?
That's right.
Yashov Abraham el Beersheba, Pasuk 19 is the end of Parshat Vayera.
Isn't there a midrash that basically said that she died when she heard that he was going to sacrifice
Yes,
Yitzhak?
we'll see that. We'll see that today.
Okay, sorry, jumping.
Wait, we'll get there. Don't worry. We'll cover everything. We'll cover what we can. So Vayu Chaye Sarah, Parsha opens up, Me'ashana, and the Sarah's lifetime was Me'ashana, 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'sheva Shanim, and 7 years, Shnei Chaye Sarah, the years of Sarah's life. So what's the obvious question you're all jumping to ask? How would you say this pasuk? We know the Torah is concise, and every word is written in a golden pen, and every word and every letter is written for something for us to learn from. So what's the question?
Why does it say twice Shnei?
They say Shana, Mea Shana, 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 3 times.
Wait, one second. Let's deal with Shlomo first.
ושבע שנה, שני חיי שרה. שני is 2.
No, Shnei means a lifetime. The years of. Shanim, like Shanim.
I think it's Shnei means 2 lives.
What 2 lives?
Before the Akedah and after the Akedah.
Okay. I think we'll see. Rashi disagrees with you. But
After the Akedah, she died.
sorry, Yossi?
After the Akedah, she died.
Oh, we'll see that in Rashi soon. That's why I said it's still Rashi disagrees. But Yossi
Why
jumps
doesn't
up.
it just say 127?
Why didn't you just say 100?
Why does
It says she was 100 years old. She was 20 years old. She was 7 years old. Just say very simply, she was 127.
That's right.
Complicated? Said Rashi. ויהיו חיי שרה 100 שנה ו20 שנה ו7 שנים. לכך נכתב שנה בכל כלל וכלל. You know what? I'm going to do something a little bit unorthodox. I'm going to jump to the next Rashi first. Shnei חיי שרה, the years of Sarah's life, כולן שווים לטובה. You should just know, Sarah, if you want to know what her life looked like, day 1 was like day 127. When she was 50 years old, she was in the same level of tzidkut, of greatness, of righteousness, Rashi will see in a minute, of beauty, whatever that means, as her last day of her death. Incredible. Okay, let's go back. Rashi says as follows. "Lekach nichtav shana b'chol klal v'klal." This is why the word shana, years, was written in each category. 100 years, 20 years, 7 years, 127 years. Says Rashi, "V'amar lecha shekol echad nidrash le'atzmo." To come and tell you that each one is expounded in its own right. Bat me'ah, when she was 100 years old, kebat esrim. She was like she was 20. What does that mean? Bat me'ah kebat esrim lechet. Ma bat esrim lo chat'ah, shaharei eina bat onashim, af bat me'ah velo chet. Just like in Torah law, in a court of law established by the Torah, then a boy the age of 13, and a girl the age of 12 is considered a fully matured adult, and therefore is responsible and liable for their actions. As a result, if chas v'shalom they would do something, let's say they would kill someone, and they would have a death penalty in the times when we had a Sanhedrin, for example, then the halakha would be they would actually be put to death, even though a little 13-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl, not so little. Don't underestimate the maturity of a 12-year-old girl and 30-year-old man, which is just as, in terms of maturity, is fully fledged. Speak to psychologists to decide whether your mental brain power is fully developed till 20 or 30, whatever it is, that's another discussion. But in terms of halachic responsibility, they are considered a fully fledged adult. And therefore, in a Torah and halachic law, then we already established that at the age of 13 or 12 for a girl. But the heavenly law, which is a different type of form of judgment, if you want, that law only begins at the age of 20. That's why there's a custom for some at the age of 20 for people to fast or for people to stay up the whole night. There's different ancient customs for that. But either way, the point was, in terms of heavenly punishment, the type of woman Sarah was at the age of 20 was the same level she was at the age of 100. So we want to equate 100 to 20. Ubat esrim kibat sheva. So why 20 and 7? What's that? Each one's a separate bracket. Because bat esrim kibat sheva leyofi. You should know the beauty of Sarah was she was as beautiful at the age of 20 as she was at the age of 7. Different Mepharshim explain. First of all, what does beauty mean? I had this discussion with Shlomo at the end of Shachrit last week, Shabbat. What does beauty mean when the Torah talks about beauty? It's incredible. The Torah puts quite a strong emphasis on the beauty of the imahot. Sarah was a very beautiful woman. Tovat mar'eh, yefat Torah tovat mar'eh. Rachel was a very beautiful woman. Rivka, this week's parasha, was a very beautiful woman. Why the emphasis on the external beauty? And seemingly we talk about sheker hachen, we say every Friday night, vehevel hayofi. What is beauty really? In Jewish, simply a physical thing. Does that have any relevance in Judaism? Discussion in its own right. Bottom line is, I'm just going to tell you the idea. The idea is the inner beauty which shone forth is where the Torah is emphasizing the beauty of the physical beauty of the imahot, of the matriarchs. But there's a whole deeper discussion what that means, again, for another class. Either way, the beauty of a 7-year-old, she was as beautiful when she was 20. What does that mean? Many different explanations. One explanation is a 7-year-old from 7 till 20, then her beauty is developing. And at 20, that's where it climaxes. One explanation. Another explanation I actually heard this week at the funeral of Rabbi Feinstein, who passed away this week. Someone said, if you look at a 20-year-old and she's wearing something which is perhaps inappropriate or doesn't fit her right or just doesn't look right, she's, it's messed up. You just killed it. A 70-year-old, if she wears something which is not 100% right for her, it doesn't matter. She's still who she is because she's as beautiful as she is as a 7-year-old, forgiven. Her level of beauty was there in terms of the beauty physically and in terms of the beauty of the mitzvot and her level of sin that she was there all the way through till 127 years old. That's Rashi's first point, which he brings out. Vatamot Sarah Bekiryat Abba. I should just mention a midrash. I just thought it was a nice midrash, which you should know. It's a cute one, just something practical which we can learn out from. The midrash says the following. Yes, someone.
Again, it should be reversed order of the sentences, what you keep.
Go on.
First of all, she has to die, then you tell how long she lived. So, Pasuk Bet should be before Pasuk Aleph.
It's a very, very good question. And
Usually, almost all of them, they say the age and then they say that they passed away. Abraham the same.
yeah, but the Rechaim, others asked, and it should have said Vayiyu. It should have said Vaychi Sarah, and she lived for 127 years and she died. That's what it usually says in other psukim. It doesn't say that over here. So the answer to that is what we started off with. The answer to that is a very fair question, Shlomo. I think that was the introduction. There's a connection between the end of last week's parasha and now. And that will lead us to our next Rashi in 2 Rashi's time. Just give me 2 minutes. I want to say another point and hopefully I'll be able to answer you before that. But that's a very good question. Just make sure we come back to it because I may forget. The midrash goes as follows. Midrash, very nice midrash. Rebbe Kiva was once giving a class. He wanted to give a shiur. Midrash says, "Ubikshu ha'am lehitnamnim," and the students suddenly wanted to doze off. Can you imagine? This is Rebbe Kiva, the great Rebbe Akiva, the greatest of all Tanaim, and you come to hear a class and every, 40 winks now. But that's what the Midrash says. Says the Midrash. He said to them a Midrash Agadah. He wanted to tell them an Agadic Midrash to wake them up, give them a bit of spice to spice up their thing. They shouldn't fall asleep. So what did he tell them? It's been like saying a joke just to wake people up. Lama Esther zachta lihimalech al 127 medinot. Why did Esther go to have the merit to rule over how many countries? 127. Hey, 1 second. I know that number. You know why? Says the Midrash, because Sarah lived for 127 years. Beautiful Midrash. What? Very often the Midrashim, it's a very cryptic Midrashim, esoteric type Midrashim. They don't make no sense. In fact, there are certain type of Midrashim which are called the Midrash Pili'ah. It's like a bombastic Midrash. It just doesn't make any sense. And there's whole books written on different types of Midrashim. Not the place now to discuss what is the place of Midrash in Torah. You see Rashi often quotes selective Midrashim to answer questions. We discussed that in the first class. But again, not for now, we don't want to go off point. So someone said that there's many different explanations to explain this connection between Sarah and Esther. But one explanation I heard is very beautiful. I thought it was really nice. Rashi just said that Esther's life was kulam shavin letova. They were all equal days in her level of avodat Hashem, in her service of God. Year 50 was the same as year 107. Year 107 was the same as year 120. And year 120 was the same as year 127. So someone said something so beautiful. I heard this from my Rebbe who passed away about 15 years ago, Reb Chaim Kaufman, Zichrono Livracha. He was I would say he was my Rebbe in Chumash Rashi. He gave me the tools to navigate the Rishonim, the Mefarshim in Chumash. Beautiful, beautiful idea. So he says it's a beautiful thing. He says, let's do the math. Hana, who's the black belt mathematicians here? So if there's 127 years, that means for every year, Sarah lived 127 years, for every year, then Esther got one country. So far so good. She ruled over 127 countries. Sarah lived 127 years. So every year is one country. Okay. That means for every month, she must have got one province. Okay. For every week, she must have got one town. For every day, she must have got one neighborhood, one area. Shaughnessy, I live here, Shaughnessy. For every hour, she got one big block, Oak Street, one big road. And for every minute, she must have got 1027, whatever it is. So every minute of Avodat Hashem, of Sarah, was what gave her great-great-granddaughter the merit to be able to be queen over 127 countries. What Rebbe Akiva was trying to tell the students, you're falling asleep. Hey guys, 1 minute of Torah learning, 1 minute of Avodat Hashem. Do you know what that means? Do you know what you can get? You can get houses, you can get blocks, you can get countries. Says Rebbe Akiva, guys, wake up. This week's parasha, every kulam shavim letovah. Okay, that was just in brackets. Let's continue with Shlomo's question because it's burning him. Let's move on. Says the pasuk further. Vatamot Sarah bekiryat arba. And Sarah died where? In Kiryat Arba, Hebron. My sister reminded me today, 10 years ago, I was in Kiryat Arba for Shabbat, my cousin's twin bar mitzvah. Quite an experience, I must tell you. Hebron, that is Hebron, Be'eretz Canaan, in Eretz Canaan, Vayavo Avraham lispod leSarah velivkota. And Abraham came to eulogize Sarah, velivkota, and to cry for her. So, let's go through the Rashis. Okay, anybody want to raise any questions on this pasuk? Are there any seemingly difficulties in this pasuk?
Just a small calf.
Okay, that's a good question. Anything else? We'll deal with that hopefully, or maybe. No? Okay. If you're happy with the pasuk, we can move on. We don't need Rashi then. I'll tell you what Rashi.
I just want to add something to the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to mention Vayavo Avraham lispod leSarah velivkota, and it, knowing that Torah is always very succinct and minimalistic in its description, it's basically void of any emotion. So that's pretty powerful because it elevates the significance of doing a eulogy for someone who passes. And it also tells us of Abraham's emotional state. Like,
very interesting you point that out. That is very interesting you point that out. There is much discussion on this pasuk, on these three words, lispod leSarah velivkota, which interestingly enough, Rashi doesn't point out. And it's just very interesting to note how Rashi only points out stuff which is really bothersome in the pasuk. If Rashi is asking a question or saying a Rashi, it's because the pshat, remember we said at the beginning, Rashi is dealing with the pshuto shel mikra, basic understanding of the pasuk. And if it doesn't make sense, Rashi will point it out. Gabi asked the question last week. If the Rashi doesn't ask it, it doesn't mean the other commentators on the Torah don't point it out. But it's interesting to note how Rashi's coming forth with a very simplistic understanding of the basic text. A lot of eulogies are based on this pasuk. You can imagine. It's a classic. Rabbi Sachs passed away. First thing they quoted was this week's parasha, lispod leSarah velivkota. And the question which many Mefarshim asked, many commentators asked, lispod leSarah velivkota, to eulogize Sarah, velivkota, and to cry. So I mentioned one of the days after Shachrit this week, there's an obvious question over here. What usually happens? You first cry, then you have the funeral. At the funeral, you have the eulogy. You don't have a funeral, have the eulogy, and then you cry. In fact, the pasuk doesn't even talk about the funeral. He just kind of dives straight into the eulogy. And they thought, oh, and he cried. What's that? Shlomo also pointed out a chaf, a small chaf. What's that about? It sounds like the crying was minimalistic. The Ellen pointed out the Veliv Kotal, we're talking about the emotional state of Abraham. That's an interesting point as well. You know, what level of emotion was he? Again, wherever he lived down, it makes no difference. But he came to a situation where he's coming home jubilant over the Besorah, the Nevu'ah, the prophecy which he gets after fulfilling the top of the top, the climax of almost slaughtering his son for the will of God. And God promises him, you are prepared to do that, you're going to have everything. He comes home and she's dead. What? What sort of paradox of emotions do you have over it? It's a roller coaster. But again, we're not dealing with Rashi's, with other commentators' questions. We can have whole separate classes on that. We're going to deal with Rashi. Rashi's bothered with something. Rashi's bothered by Vatamot Sarah Bekiryat Arba. What Kiryat Arba? What is that? Kiryat Arba, he Hebron. We know Kiryat Arba is Hebron. So why say the two? What's the pointer that we're trying to use over here that the pasuk is trying to highlight?
Why say Eretz Canaan?
Well, we know he's in Eretz Canaan.
No, but it's an overstatement. It's like a da, right?
No, but we want to know location. We want to know location. We say, look, don't forget, this negotiation, Abraham is about to bury his wife in this area, was for a reason. Rashi is going to point out why. But there's something going on over here which is going to have ramifications lidorot until today. The place which he bought wasn't just a random house or a random tomb or grave or cave. It was what we know as Me'arat HaMachpelah. Says Rashi, let's point out the Rashi. Bekiryat Arba, Al Shem Arba Anakim Shahayu Sham. The reason why it's called Kiryat Arba, the area of the four, which is otherwise known as Hebron, Al Shem, because there were four giants which were there, Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai, and their father. Interesting that the three of them have names and their father doesn't. Or at least we don't know it, or Rashi doesn't point it out. It's also interesting that later on in Parshat Shelach Lecha, when we talk about the giants which the spies go and see, Rashi points out it's these guys. So they clearly had quite a long lifespan. Okay, well, they're superhuman if you want. They're not normal people, the giants. That is, again, another discussion where they came from. Okay. Either way, I'm not sure, to be totally honest, I'm not quite sure why Rashi's pointing this out. Four giants, very nice. And what does that help anyone? Why do we have to know that? Mepharshim do try and explain exactly. The Mizrahi, who is one of the primary commentators on Rashi, there's actually Chumash now with 11 Pirushim on Rashi, 11 commentaries on Rashi. So not other commentaries on the Torah, there's 11 commentaries on Rashi who are super commentaries. Some, the Maharal of Prague is one of the great ones. There's the Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi, another very great one. Anyway, they come up on the side. Either way, he asked this question. He says, yeah, I mean, very nice, four giants. What's that got to do with us? Why do we have to know that? What's this relevant to this pasuk? I don't know the answer to that. Let's move on. Davar acher, Rashi. Yes, Yossi.
I know that English, I changed. I know that Sarah was standing on one of the giants when she was seeing the Akedah. So maybe that's the connection why the giants are there in Hebron.
Nice Perush. Let's speak about the next Rashi when we can go back to that. I don't know. I haven't seen that Midrash that was specifically one of them. There's a Midrash about Og. There's various conflicting Midrashim, and you have to know how to take those, how you take it with a pinch of salt. Sometimes you have to know when to take, when not to take. That's esoteric language, which again is another class for its own. Why the Torah is given in such a form with Midrashim where it's written such, wild Midrashim, which seemingly makes no sense. And it's obviously written.
So we can have classes like this.
We don't have enough. That's the problem. Because every time we
That-
have,
I think Freud would have something to say about that.
That's where I'm pushing.
All right.
all right, I'm ready. Okay, let's move on. Davar acher. Now, the truth is, when Rashi writes davar acher, Rashi's trying to say, I think there's different ways to write it. If Rashi's coming to answer a question, then there's sometimes ve'od, and also he'll give another answer, or there's ve'od yesh lomar. There's different ways it's written. Davar acher, I don't remember offhand if he's trying to say,
Turn back a
check
half
this
hour.
up, just to confirm. Is he trying to say the first answer is not substantial? Or he's just giving you just a different direction to answer the same thing? I don't remember. You know, in Tosfot, there's a formula for that. I don't remember in Rashi. I don't want to say something which I'm not 100%. Davar acher, says Rashi, another explanation. Al Shem arba zugot shenikveru sham ish v'ishto. The reason why it's called Kiryat Arba is a very important piece of information, because over there in this tomb or in this cave, there were 4 zugot, there were 4 pairs. Who were they? Of husband and wife. Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Sarah. Yitzchak and Rivka, Isaac and Rebecca. Yaakov and Leah, Jacob and Leah. So if you want to know, says Rashi, do you have any idea why Abraham is now going through immense or intense negotiations with Ephron? And it's a nightmare to deal with the guy. Because he first starts off, listen, we're friends. I mean, what's the little piece of land between friends? And then Abraham says, okay, yeah, but I want to pay. He says, how much? Oh, 400 meot dinar kesef is good enough. I mean, $4 million. I mean, what's that between friends, right? So, you know, this guy is a bit of a nightmare to negotiate with. But the question is, why is Abraham in this, again, don't forget the background, the emotional setting he's in. He's got a situation on his hands, and he's going for this extreme grave. Take a shovel, old-fashioned shovel, backyard. Abraham Avinu is a very wealthy personality. Go and bury him. You've got slaves. If that's your problem, deal with it. Why are you going after this? Says Rashi, this place was important. Do you know why it was important? Because Adam and Chava were buried in this place. And Abraham wanted to be buried in the same area as Adam and Chava were buried. Kiryat Arba hi Hebron. The type of place it is Kiryat Arba, because the reason why this whole story continues for negotiation is because, not because of Hebron, but because Hebron is the place of the burial of the four couples. They weren't buried there yet, but Adam and Chava was there, and that was going to be the place which became the holy site in Hebron till today, where we all go to pray whenever we go there. Yes, Yossi.
So I don't know if you mentioned it, I got disconnected before. So they said that, I think last week parasha, when it says that El Bakar Ratz Avraham, when he was running after the cattle for the Malachim, that's where he saw the Ma'arat HaMachpelah with the entrance to Gan Eden. So that's why he wanted there.
My wife's grandfather is called Gabbai. And I think I mentioned before, he was very happy when we got married that my wife became a Gabbai again. And, so I once went, he lives in Tzfat. And I remember I once went to visit him Friday afternoon. Erev Shabbat, we went to visit him for Shabbat. And he was telling me, Tzfat, Hebron, Yerushalayim, there's another one, and Tveria are the 4 great cities.
זה 4 קריות.
Sorry?
4 קריות, זה נקרא.
קריות?
כן, ערים, עיר. 4 קריות, זה מה שאמרת.
Right. They're the 4 cities, famous cities, right? Kabbalistically, it's brought down that after Yerushalayim was destroyed, the Kedusha of Yerushalayim went to Hebron, Tzfat and Tveria, these places, these areas, right? So there's certain key places, if you want, where there's a greater connection to
You just, okay.
sorry, there's a greater connection to heaven, if you want a great direction, whatever that means, at certain spots. The Kotel, for example, it's a consecrated place. It's because there are certain areas which have greater kedusha. Again, these are deeper concepts which we have no idea about. But anyway, coming back to what Yossi mentioned, one of them was this place, and hence the reason why it was supposed to be there. There was a reason, for example, the Akedah was on Har HaMoriah. What's Har HaMoriah? The place of the
11 Ashtia. Yeah.
The place where the Dome of the Rock is currently.
Bet HaMikdash.
Correct. It's all correct. And the Midrash says Adam Rishon was built from that area. Again, there's lots of connections between specific places which have great relevance in throughout history. Okay, coming back to our point. Either way, this place was a very special place. Says Rashi, Kiryat Arba was there specifically a reason why Abraham is going to make sure he's going to go negotiate this place as a burial place for Sarah. I'm just going to mention in brackets also a side point. I think it's important. We just learned in Eruvin, in the Daf, which we're finishing in Bezrat Hashem in 2 weeks' time, but the Gemara in Eruvin actually brings this Rashi, and Rashi gets it from the Gemara, but the Talmud points out there's a machloket. I think it's Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that Kiryat Arba, not Kiryat Arba, the Me'arat HaMachpelah, which is here, Eruvin Nun Gimel. If you look at Pasuk Tet, the place is called Ve'yiten li et Me'arat HaMachpelah, Pasuk 9. Rashi points out, Bait ve'aliyah al gabav. It is one cave and another cave underneath it. Davar acher, Rashi points out another point, shekfula b'zugot. It's Me'arat HaMachpelah, the double cave. It's double because there's double husband and wives. There's double couples there. There's another opinion in the Gemara that says there's actually a cave, one cave within another cave. So the question is, very often in Midrashim or in the Gemara, when there's a machloket on historical facts, how do you reconcile the two? You got Rav that says that it's a cave on top of a cave, that's why it's called a double cave. And Shmuel says it's called a cave within a cave. And that's where they were buried. And then Rashi said the other pshat, that it means actually the cave of the doubles, as in the double couples. So how do you reconcile the two? I mean, there's got to be a certain level of reality. Was it a cave on top of a cave? Was it a cave within a cave? I mean, was it nothing? It's just called Marat Machpelah because of the zugot that were there, because of the couples. Yes,
Maybe.
No, the point being is that for me is that Abraham must have been well aware of Machpelah. He must have lived there for some time to know that it existed, and for him it might have been a visionary thing in the future. All right. My question comes back though that he approaches the people there and he says, "Look, I'm a sojourner, okay, and there's resident. So treat me as one or the other. I'm looking for a place to bury my dead." And then he comes to, they say, "Well, you're one of us. Bury your dead where you want." And he comes back. He says, "Well, just a minute. If that's the case, if you consider me as one of the residents, then please plead for me with the son of Zohar to sell me this piece of land." So, which includes Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah. All right. So the question is, why does he say that he's a sojourner and a resident? He's one or the other. He's not going to be both.
So Rashi deals with that. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get that today. But your Rashi is bothered by exactly the same question that Dan is bothered with. Let me just quickly point out 2 points. I'm going to just tell you 1 point, and I'm going to tell you one more Rashi, and then we have to close for the evening, unfortunately. Never enough time, I'm sorry.
Just when it gets good. Oh.
I'm sorry. So the Pasuk said like this. So I was going to tell you the Midrash. So we said, how do the two Midrashim reconcile? Just very briefly, I was once reading an article in Israel where a bunch of people decided to go into the Me'arat HaMachpelah and do some sort of clarification to understand what's going on. What does it look like?
I
And the
heard.
problem is the entrance to downstairs
Yeah.
is from the kever of Yitzchak Avinu, from the kever of Yitzchak, and the grave of Yitzchak is only opened twice a year. It's in the Arab area, it's the mosque, and the opening is under a carpet in the thing. They were open one day, one night, they bury up the wall, and they have a couple of hours to make sure they get in and out safely or not. There was many stories of people that tried to go in and died. It was such a holy place. Lots of stories. There's actually the Chesed Abraham, my grandmother's great-great-grandfather, Avraham Azulai, had a very famous story that the king's sword fell through the cracks of the Me'arat HaMachpelah, and nobody wanted to go down there. He sent soldiers down, they all died. And so they asked Chesed Abraham to go down and retrieve the sword, the jewel-studded sword, and he had to pray, he fasted to go in. Eventually he goes in, there's a whole story. Again, not for now. But either way, coming back to our point, they go in and they manage to get out. It caused a terrible media storm, you can imagine. Nobody asked them to do it, but this is what happened. And they wrote an article, which I read in the paper, a couple of years, 30, I think it was 25 or 30 years later. And I was in Israel at the time, and I was reading this article. And they said, exactly, they brought up this Gemara, this Rashi. And they said, lo and behold, it's incredible. Because Me'arat Machpelah was actually both. If you go down, there's a cave on top, and then you have to go into a cave. So it's one and the second level. And then once you get into the bottom cave, there's a front cave and there's an inner cave. And they say they couldn't get into the inner cave and whatever, they had to go back because of the time, because the Arabs will come and all sorts. But isn't that beautiful? All three Pirushim which Rashi brings. Number one, it was a cave on top of a cave. Number two, it was a cave within a cave. And number three, there was the Zugot, there was the double cave of the double couples. That is all the Pirushim in one. In reality, you see how all the Medrashim, it's not a question of what's right or what's wrong. The question is perhaps what's the emphasis. Very often you find that when there's a machloket between two people, it's not about who's right or who's wrong. The question is, where do we emphasize? Do we emphasize this point or do we emphasize this point for whatever reason?
No, it's just it's machpelah or machpelah.
Yeah, that's right.
But I have something that I'm thinking about now is that
So-
Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef is buried in Shechem.
Yeah.
An hour and 15 minutes with no traffic drive between Shechem and Hebron. Why he was not buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah?
It's an interesting question. Like, I mean, why wasn't anybody else buried? I mean, why wasn't there's plenty of great people.
He's the only one we know it's the only one we know his grave was.
No, we know what Kever Dan is. We know what Kever Binyamin is. We know nowadays.
Really?
We know where things are. Yeah, for sure. Shechem is the big one because of what the constant protest and stuff. But they, every time they burn it and they mess it up, whatever. But the overall thing is interesting. Noach and his wife weren't buried there. There's lots of other great tzaddikim who could have also been buried there, but there seemed to be there was four. There was no space for anybody else. Yeah, there's a
Why
Gemara says that.
Why didn't they bring Rachel there?
So Rashi says, if we look at the end of Vayechi, Yosef has it out with his father, and it's very interesting because Yaakov, at the end of his life, has it out with Yosef. Doesn't kind of like let it go. Don't forget, Rachel dies, and he has to bury her where it is, and Yaakov addresses it to Yosef at the end of his life. You shouldn't be angry with me that I didn't take her to Me'arat HaMachpelah. But there was a reason for that. And Rashi points out that reason, that it was what Yaakov didn't know about, but later on, he had to, the Jews would actually go past the gravestone, and Rachel would pray on behalf of the Jews that they should come back to this world. It's incredible. You go to Kever Rachel, I think there's such a special place, for our mother in our hearts. When you go there, there's a special feeling, besides for Me'arat HaMachpelah. I've got 1 minute, which to point out the last Rashi which I want to point out. Lispod lesara vayavo Abraham, where from? Bereshit. I'm not going to go into the discussion which Dan said before. Where was he living beforehand? What is it? Is it Hebron? Is it Bereshit? I mean, he's coming from Bereshit. What's he doing in Bereshit? If Sarah died in Hebron, then he should be going back to Hebron. Why is he going to Bereshit? A pit stop? What's going on? You're just coming home with the good news. So there's something strange going on over here. Dan mentioned it very briefly. We're not going to go into that right now. Rashi says, the death of Sarah was connected to the end of the last parasha, Akedat Yitzchak. Because when Sarah heard that Yitzchak was about to be killed, difficult wording there, which can be addressed, she died. What happened? Rashi is quoting a Midrash Tanchuma that says what happened was the Satan came to Sarah, the giant, whatever, and she heard that there was an Akedah going on. Her only son, her son who was born at the age of 90. How old was Yitzchak at the age of Akedah?
37.
37. 90 plus 37? 127. That's why she dies. She heard the Akedah and she dies.
Yeah.
What's the connection with Vayavo Avraham? The reason why Vayavo Avraham, he's coming and then straight away she dies, is because there's a connection between her death and his coming. She, who asked before, I don't remember who asked before, what is this? Vayiyu Chaye Sarah, Dan, Shlomo, I don't remember. That there was the years of Sarah, 127 years. What's that all about? The answer is she should have lived longer, but she died from a heart attack. What was the heart attack? Yeah. The heart attack was the Akedah. The Satan comes to the Akedah, to Sarah, and says, your beloved son, your husband didn't tell you this, but guess what? He's being slaughtered as we talk. Sarah couldn't take it. This is her beloved son who was born at the age of 90. It was an incredible miracle, and she dies before her time. This is the breakdown of Vayavo Avraham Yispod LeSarah V'Livkota. There's a connection between the end of the last week's parasha and this part of the parasha, which is all connected, all as a result of the Akedah. I'm not going to elaborate so much. I'm just going to finish you with one thought. The thought is like this. What is relevance does it have to us? Myra said we should have always a point of takeaway. There's a very beautiful point we can take away from this. And that is, there's a discussion amongst the Rishonim if this was the final test, the Akedah, or if the final test was actually coming home and being so dashed. Spoke about it before. Now, so some say like this, and I think they put it together, it's very beautiful. It was all the same. Very often, we say in Hashkivenu, on every night, we say, Vehaser Satan milefanenu umeacharenu. And remove the Satan, Yetzirah, from before us and from after us. Before us, I understand. What's after us? Before the action, I don't want to have the Yetzirah. I don't want to have that evil inclination making me do the sin. But after, it's done. It's done. Either have passed, haven't passed. What's after? And the answer is so beautiful and I think so relevant to each one of us, every single one of us. And that is, when we talk about a nisayon, a test, then a person can have a test. And Abraham goes and does the greatest thing ever. And God says, Ataya dati kireh Elohim ata. Now I know you are a faithful servant. You've made it. You've hit the top. But God didn't finish the test there. The test was, I'm going to come home. And bang. The immediate knee-jerk reaction was should be, God, seriously? That's what you do to me? I've given you everything and this is what you do? And Abraham doesn't question. In fact, Lispod LeSarah V'Livkota is with a small chaf because he didn't question God's judgment. Vehaser Satan milefanenu me'acharenu. How many times we do a mitzvah? For example, give charity. Give a large amount of money to someone, to help someone, for chesed. And then we come home and someone says, oh, you should know, it's such a waste of money. Why'd you give so much money? I mean, he doesn't really need it, and we need it, whatever it is. So you not only lost the mitzvah, you not only lost the money, because you're not getting the money back, you already gave it, we also lost the mitzvah, because you're regretting the mitzvah that you did. Vehaser Satan milefanenu u'me'acharenu. Remove the Satan from before the act and from after the act. We shouldn't have regret on the mitzvot that we've done, or the hoops that we've jumped through. And that is Yitzchak, that is Abraham. He comes at this stage and he's ready to, and he's let down. But that is part and parcel of the Akedah. The Akedah didn't finish there. Rather, it was the ultimate test. How are you going to take your test of the Akedah and go forward with it? Are you going to say, forget it, I'm not, the Akedah was such a bad thing I did? Or believe kota with a small chaf. And I think that's really a beautiful message. Okay, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Rabbi.
Toda rabba.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.